Let's talk about section hiking on the Appalachian Trail. As I've said many times, I am a section hiker. If it needs to be explained, a section hiker is someone who hikes part of the AT, maybe a small part, maybe a big part. Generally speaking, section hikers spend at least one night on the trail. Those who don't tend to be day hikers. And a thru hiker walks the entire trail in a year, most sources tell us. On social media and in blogs, many thru hikers tell us why they do it and how they do it. When it comes to section hiking, I can only speak for myself. I have found the AT to be such a compelling place, I have returned to it again and again. I freely admit, I quickly became addicted to section hiking on the Appalachian Trail. Apparently, I am not alone. The AT Conservancy estimates up to 3 million people walk on the AT every year. Statistically speaking, very few of them are attempting a thru hike. Even if the real annual number is only 1.5 million, half the ATC estimate, that's still 387 times greater than the number that attempted a northbound or southbound thru hike in 2017. The ATC lists that number at 3,867. The link's in the description. Among other things, we will talk about the similarities and differences between thru hiking and section hiking. In some cases, similarities are striking, and so are the differences. One big detail is that for many millions of Americans, the AT is fairly close by. I live near Columbus, Ohio. If I get in my car at 7 a.m., obey the speed limit, stop a couple of times for gas and a sandwich, I can be standing on the AT at 2 o'clock that afternoon. Many parking areas are right next to the trail, and the AT Conservancy can tell us where they are. We'll look at more details on this later. Here's another big item. We can make a section hike as easy or as challenging as we like. If we want it to be challenging, the sky's the limit. But first, the easy hikes. I've talked to a couple of people who parked their car near the trail and walked to an AT shelter or campsite to spend the night. Then they returned to their car and were done. And maybe they never set foot on the AT again. I've met other people who hiked 10 or 15 miles for 2 or 3 days and then went home. I once met a guy at a hostel who had a lot of hiking gear in his car. He'd been hanging around the hostel for a number of days, and for all I knew, he didn't do any hiking at all. On my first AT trip, a friend and I took 3 days to walk the first 20 miles. Like a couple of wide-eyed tourists, we spent a lot of time standing around and just staring at everything. If we want to backpack for several days, the Shenandoah National Park is the easiest AT terrain I have been on. Unlike most other areas, the trail is quite smooth and the footing is easy. Except for either end, the climbs are no worse than about 600 feet over a span of several miles. Trail intersections are well marked, the views are beautiful, the park has several campgrounds and multiple stores. On the other hand, I have met section hikers covering hundreds of miles at a time, and we'll look at this more in detail later. As more than a few YouTube videos tell us, some thru hikers extol the virtues of social action with other hikers, the benefits of traveling with the trail family, and the assurance that, quote, the trail will provide. A section hiker indeed might experience these things if they happen to be moving north with a thru hiking bubble at the trail's southern end in late winter or early spring. On the other hand, if somebody section hikes when I do, such social interactions will be limited to pleasant chats with others that rarely exceed 5 minutes. That's because large numbers of thru hikers are at any given spot on the trail for a limited number of weeks. When I'm on the AT, I'm usually nowhere near a thru hiking bubble. Thru hiking videos and stories tell us about the generosity of trail magic and trail angels on the AT. One might assume trail magic can be found everywhere on the AT and maybe on every trail in America. I encountered trail angels in person on the AT twice on my first section hike, and I haven't seen another one since. Not one. I assume that's because trail angels are active mainly when thru hikers pass through. It's also possible I don't walk enough miles at a time to encounter any that are out there. I like to hike in August and September. By then, The northbounders tend to be well north of wherever I am. I am not alone in this. Section hikers are all over the AT for much of the year. Consider this outtake from my section hiking video, filmed at a trailside parking lot in Virginia on September the 1st, 2017. This is the Jennings Creek trailhead. We got a car from Pennsylvania, Maryland, Kentucky, and the Virginian. Trail comes out there, crosses the bridge, heads south over there, opposite on the other side of the bridge. If out-of-state cars are at a remote spot like that, I would wager each one belongs to a section hiker. Jennings Creek in Virginia is not exactly a hot spot for day hiking tourists. We can, of course, still meet friendly, helpful people any time of year. There just won't be large numbers of them in the thru hiking off-season. During my latest section hike, I had a nice chat with a couple out for a drive. We said hello at a spot where the trail crossed the Blue Ridge Parkway. The wife went to their car for a minute and returned to offer me a couple of snack bars, which she said was all they had. That was a very nice thing to do, and I thanked her profusely. I also assured her I was well supplied and didn't need them. Many section hikers will be on the AT with friends or family members. If we value in any way our relationship with our section hiking partner, my advice is stick together and let the slower person set the pace. To put it another way, I would never move ahead and leave a hiking partner far behind. If I hike fast and leave a slower partner to catch up, I easily could find myself in the position of wondering what happened to them when I stop and they fail to appear. It's true that thru hiking friends or partners can become widely separated, but this tends to happen when they have many hundreds of miles under their belts. For less experienced section hikers, I think it's a mistake to separate. As I've said before, it's easy to fall down on the AT, and if it's easy to fall down, that makes it easier to crack our heads, or twist an ankle, or break a leg. And that's just one example. I section hiked 3 times with a younger friend of mine who would race up hills ahead of me and be waiting and laughing at me when I caught up. Then, on an easy backpacking trail closer to home, he fell behind me on one trip. This was out of character for him, so I waited quite a while for him to catch up. It had been raining, we both had wet feet, and a blister slowed him to a crawl. We were near a side trail that would take us to the car. I suggested we end the hike, and he quickly agreed. If that had happened on the AT, I might have had to backtrack to find him to learn what the problem was. Hiking with a stranger for more than a short distance is something I have never done and I would hesitate to do. It's very unlikely we would want to move at a similar speed for any length of time. I once had a chat with a woman at a hostel who said she was doing at least 20 miles a day. She told me a number of people had asked to hike with her, and she warned them she would not slow down. She said she outran all of them and never saw them again. Speaking for myself, my goal on the Appalachian Trail is to do as much walking as I can in the limited time available. This can pose 2 logistical challenges. I will say up front that I have not come up with a perfect answer to either one of these challenges, but let's look at them in detail. This jerky footage shows U.S. Route 220 at the AT in Daleville, Virginia. A few days before I shot this, I met a guy doing a section hike from the Shenandoah National Park to this road. That's about 135 miles from the park's southern border. His wife was going to meet him in Daleville, and then they would go home. For such a long hike, I can't think of a better transportation approach than meeting a friend or relative at the end of our route. But what if we have no such friend or relative? That is my situation. No one I know has the time to chauffeur me a couple of 100 miles to get me off the AT. There are, of course, many trail angels happy to give free rides to hikers from a trailhead to a town. But driving a hiker from Daleville to his car in the Shenandoah National Park, if that's where we park, is a different story. If a shuttle driver lives anywhere between Daleville and the SMP, it will take 270 miles of driving to get a hiker from Daleville to the park. First, the driver has to get to Daleville, then cover the 135 miles to the park, then return home. Only a paid shuttle driver can be expected to take on a job like that. In the description is a link to an ATC PDF on shuttles and public transportation. One service says it charges $2 a mile. If that's at all typical, the Daleville to the S&P ride would cost $270. That, however, is only part of the equation. Scanning the list shows that many shuttles say they operate only in specific areas. It would take some phone calls to find someone willing to make the Daleville to S&P drive. Another detail is scheduling. It would be ideal if we can accurately predict to the hour when we would finish such a 135-mile walk. I am incapable of such an accurate prediction, which means the shuttle might not be available at my convenience. The driver might be in the middle of another long drive somewhere else. Both of these things also might be true if I instead tell a driver I'll just call him when I need the ride. Another link in the description discusses public transportation along the trail. Those services operate at a limited number of spots along the AT. So what do I do about all this? I have no friends to drive me. I've got an ex-wife and several ex-girlfriends, and on our best day, I don't think I could have sweet-talked any of them into dropping what they were doing to fetch me from the AT. I cannot afford something like a $270 ride to get me back to my car. Experience has shown me that I cannot accurately predict how many miles I'll end up walking. I have to get home in a timely manner because my job is waiting, and I want to spend as many hours as possible walking. I started section hiking on the AT long before YouTube existed. At the time, I had no idea I would eventually have to make a public accounting of exactly how lame I am. But now it's time to face the music. On my section hikes, I walk in one direction until half my time is up. Then I turn around and head back to the car the same way. To put it another way, on the AT I began imitating what happened on all of my earlier backpacking trips elsewhere. They all ended where they began, and I still, to this day, cannot think of an alternative that I can manage, which means everything I've walked on the AT, I've walked twice. The roller coaster, Shenandoah National Park, Maryland, up and down the Priest. I've walked them northbound and I've walked them southbound. This raises a question. Does it bother me that I've had to do this? And the answer is no, it really hasn't, because my goal is to get out and hike. My last section hike was from Jennings Creek to Daleville, Virginia, and back. Of course, if someone has time and money, which I don't, they can plan their hikes around public transportation access points. When time is short, another potentially vexing issue is resupply, which usually means buying more food. On my last hike, I asked another section hiker how he does it. He said he tries to get in and out of a town as fast as possible. If he doesn't, a lot of hiking time will be lost. My method is a little quicker than his. I have only shopped at spots that are practically right on the trail. These have included places like Daleville, Rockfish Gap, Harper's Ferry, and the stores in the Shenandoah National Park. It's a good idea to carry something like David Miller's AT Guide. It's updated every year and tells us where we can buy food and supplies near the trail. I tend to carry all the entrees I will need on a trip, if I'm using entrees, and just buy snack items. This means I start off with more food than the typical hiker. That's something of a disadvantage, but I compensate for it to a degree by having a light base weight on my pack. Thru hikers often tell us of their ravenous appetites, but some also tell us they have to walk a number of days before a huge appetite kicks in. My longest section hike was 2 weeks, and not once have I ever felt extra hungry on the AT. I have carried a trail guide, so if by some chance I ran out of food, I knew where to buy more. But I have never come close to running out of food. Up to a point, every section hiker will have to figure this out for themselves. If we know how many days we will be on the trail, we have a pretty good clue how many meals we will need. If we have a trail guide, we'll know where the stores are. We've talked about easy section hikes. What about a challenging one? What if we want big miles and lots of days? It's no secret that some thru hikers run into trouble very early on a hike. Examples might include troubling pain in their knees, legs, ankles, or feet, and some other hikers just lose interest quickly. Neal's Gap, about 31 miles from Springer Mountain, is famous as a spot where northbounders give up and quit. Section hikers can potentially have injuries or other issues just as quickly. Anyone concerned by that possibility could start with an easy hike of 1 or 2 nights, or select an easy place like the Shenandoah Park. When it comes to finding parking areas along the AT, my go-to source has been the guidebooks published by the AT Conservancy, because they give me some idea of how to get to the parking areas. Each section in the guidebooks describes what it calls road approaches, which almost always lead to a parking area. Both of these ATC books are for Central Virginia. Unfortunately, the directions in the newest book on the right are not as detailed as those in the older book on the left. As I said, my last section hike began at Jennings Creek, Virginia. The old book told me the number of the exit I should take from Interstate 81. It also told me the number of miles from that exit to the trail. The new book is more vague. It only tells what road the parking area is on, and the fact it is west of another parking area, another road intersection, and a milepost on the Blue Ridge Parkway. David Miller's book tells us where parking areas are next to trail crossings, but we'll need another resource to figure out the directions. So that's our introduction to section hiking. We can find out more about specific areas at the ATC website, at the whiteblaze.net online forum, and from any of a number of different guidebooks. As always, thanks a million to my subscribers. If you have not yet subscribed, please consider it. And thanks a million for watching.